Okay, I'm going to be talking about making a multi-part mold because my positive is very inflexible. It's plaster and it's a very complicated form with lots of undercuts. This is actually the mold that I made by making a lot of folds in a manila file folder, and now I'm ready to, I've poured plaster in the paper pot, mold that originally, and now I'm making my mold for slip casting that bowl. So right now I'm showing you the back side of what I'm hoping will be a 3-part mold. Like, this thing is just too complicated. It has these undercuts that catch ripples and bends in the paper that are all just going to make for a little slightly more challenging mold. I'm just making sure that there's no place over here where there's a possibility that my plaster might leak to the other side. So just a little extra insurance, sealing up every single joint, making sure it all seems very stable, not ignoring any little crack, just to make sure that it's gonna stay. And as I've said before, it's so important to have nice moldable clay. Don't, just because you're gonna kind of trash it in your mold, is no reason to use dried out clay, because it's just gonna come back and bite you. So right now I've set up this as my first pour, and it's about 1/3, maybe 1/4 of the actual bowl. This is gonna be my slip repository when I flip this over for pouring. I've chosen to use a little bit of the bottom of the foot on this part of the mold, but I will have other parts that will be on other sides of the mold. Let's see, I have keyholes. I put 2 on this side. It's always helpful to have asymmetrical keyholes, because then when you're putting your mold together, it's really easier to see how it's supposed to go together. So I have 3 on this side over here. I've already put together my cottles at least from one way, so they're set up here to go kind of like this. And it's very important that I dip some clay in water, like a fat coil, and I want to make sure I completely seal the cottle and the dam that's going to hold my plaster for this part all together, because otherwise I could have a plaster disaster. I'm a little bit nervous about this because I've been working on this for a while and my clay is dried out a little, so I'm going to reinforce that even more. And then I have this one that's supposed to go here. Shouldn't have moved that because of I'd already sealed it, but can't be helped. So now it's pretty impossible to see in there. I want to remind you that I've actually sealed the plaster by soaking it in water, and then kind of putting multiple layers of Murphy's oil soap on it, letting those soak in, and then wiping off the excess. Right now I'm just getting my plaster started. So I'm putting it a little fast. I'll make sure I let it sit a solid minute there. But just to be efficient, I'm letting that happen while I finish making sure this pour is going to be very, very airtight and plaster tight and is not going to leak all over. So I'm working on that on the inside, and I also need to be thinking about that on the outside, because it could leak out this bottom edge right here. So I'll be getting that in a minute, but first I need to grab some more plants. The first few times you use the clamps and the coddles, it can be seem a little bit hard to visualize what you're supposed to be doing. But just remember there's a symmetry to it. Like the fat end of the coddle always connects with a... Oh, that was ridiculous. I can't talk and do this because I just screwed it up. Oh no, that was correct. Okay. Okay, so there's that. And this corner. All right, so I'm going to just, I put my plaster in this bucket, and now I'm just going to be doing my 3 minutes of agitation, which might be a little tedious, so for the video. So I will probably turn off the video and then restart it when I'm about to pour. So while I turn it off, I'll put that coil down along here just to make sure I don't have any risk of leaking, and I'll show you the inside in the next video, and then I'll actually show the pouring of the video. So I'll be right back. Okay, I feel like I'm ready to pour this. I've got my bead of clay on the outside of the coddles. On the inside, you can see I have my walls built out to the corners, and I'm pretty sure that my walls are nice and strong and they won't leak, but it is a real issue and an awful thing when it happens. So I do strongly encourage you to check and double check, ask other people, see if they think they aren't going to leak, and then make sure you pour your plaster after you've got a nice little wake on it, so that you're fairly confident that even if you get a small leak, the plaster's not going to flow for very long because it's about to set. So I have my plaster in a little container, and one trick to doing this is that you don't want to be pouring directly onto your positive. And actually it's really nice if you can pour it along the wall of the coddle so there's not a lot of splashing. So that basically your mold gently fills with plaster, and so it's just kind of, you're less likely to get any strange collection of air bubbles or some other weird kind of marks in your plaster that will show up on every time you cast it. So I'm pretty much done. I got that about as full as I can. Of course, I just splashed my positive with plaster. But the last thing, if you're very confident about your mold, is that you can tap it a few times to try to get any air bubbles out. And I think that's it for part 1 of this 3 or 4 part mold. Okay, so now I've taken off my coddles from 2 sides. I have my positive. Here's the clay from one wall, the clay for the second wall for my first pour is over here. So I'm going to remove this clay, and here's my first, one side of my mold. And because I have some chisels here, I think it's a good time to clean up some spots that maybe aren't perfect. So I'm seeing right here a little bit of where my plaster came out just ever so slightly. And then I have this one funny spot right here where it's not totally a 90-degree angle. There's just like a funny curve in my plaster. Why not fix it to make a better mold for the many times I will be casting this in the future? So now I'll just kind of clean off any excess clay that I might have on this part, and I'm gonna get some mold Murphy's oil soap. So here I don't have that other the big jar right now. I think I left it in the classroom. So I'll just use this to, this is basically just watered down Murphy's oil soap. So it works as well. Just need to put a few more coats on. But it's also nice because if you want to, you can spray it onto your piece rather than using your hands. So I'm just going to check this out. I just want to make sure that my slip basin right here, and make sure my slip basin is nice and clean, and clean up a piece of clay that will then become my next wall on this mold. Just smoothing out this clay using the really nice Baco tool that we have. So I had decided to really take a risk and see if I could make this wall a little bit, this side part of the mold a little bit bigger than the last one. So I'm going to go right here. First, I'm going to roll out a little coil, dip it in my water, and use that to reinforce my wall here. I'm going to smooth this off as much as I can. Get a nice mold making tool to make sure this has a really nice clean 90-degree transition from what is now a clay wall, but which will eventually become a plaster wall, and my plaster positive. I don't have a lot of forgiveness with this mold because the positive is plaster, and plaster is like really inflexible, of course. So if I get any undercuts, it's going to be very hard for me to recover from that with this mold. I'm going to give myself 2 keyholes there. Keyholes, you don't want to make them really deep because they can break off, because eventually they'll be made in plaster, and that plaster is kind of brittle. So again, reinforcing this wall back here, grabbing my cottles to put them back, and I think what I'll do now is stop the video as I just make sure my walls are nice and clean inside and that they line up with my cottles well, and then mix the second part of plaster and pour it, and I'll be back to show you the next setup for the third part. Hi, so back at the 3-part mold, I've got 2 sides poured. One's over here, one's over here, and I'm gonna cross my fingers and hope that I can make this extra large third part work with, and despite a couple very tiny undercuts so that I can see. I'm crossing my fingers that I can make this work. So at this point, there's not a lot to do to get ready to pour. All I need to do is put mold soap on these 2 walls. So I use a little Murphy's oil soap to just kind of rub in everywhere in the hopes that everything will release nicely. And I don't really have to build a wall because this time my plaster forms 2 of the walls, and then the third wall is the cottle. So this one's going to be a little bit faster to set up. And yeah, as soon as I mix the plaster, I'll pour it, and we'll be all done with pouring plaster for this 3-part mold.